I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. Every episode is written by me. It's produced by me, and I record the thing in one single, flawless take. The show is serialized, which means that each episode picks up right where the last one left off. But you don't need to start at the beginning. Feel free to dive in with this episode, especially seeing as it is the best one yet. After you're finished, after you're all in on SKALD, you can go back to listen to the previous episodes of the podcast or pick up the prose volumes available exclusively on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 79. The earthen jug came hurtling through the air toward him. It was only narrowly that Ho was able to marshal his senses, to cease his rambling, to raise his hands and catch the spinning stoneware that was flung to him by his former student, by royalty, by none other than the Vermin Prince. The jug was nearly full, and its contents sloshed out of the vessel's open mouth, splattering unceremoniously down to the floor. And though he stood above it, though he made no effort to approach that spilt liquor, Ho could feel his nose hairs singed by its noxious odor. Still holding the jug, staring at the Vermin Prince in awe, in wonderment, in confusion, and in terror, he tried to force his tongue, thick and bloated as it had become, to form words. But you, I ran for... How? The Vermin Prince allowed a faint grin to stretch its way across his mouth. Drink, Master Ho. I know you can't fight without it. Ho knew the answer to his question, knew it full well, but he did his best to mask his knowledge with bewilderment, to cover it up with simple stupidity. Fight? But why? Ho, having regained control of his tongue, continued on. I thought I was your honored guest. The Vermin Prince sneered. You were my honored guest, because I thought that I could sway you, thought that if you just saw, if you could understand. He clenched his eyes shut, and he spat out the words. That you would leave her service. Ho scrunched up his face, a picture-perfect imitation of confusion. What? Her service? Who are you? Don't you play stupid with me, Ho! The Vermin Prince roared as he leaned forward, hopping to stay upright upon his one good leg. You are smarter than you look, but you are nowhere near as smart as you think. I know why you're here. I have always known. I knew why you were here before you even were here. The Vermin Prince began to chuckle. Are you that foolish? To think that the vermin prince doesn't have eyes throughout this rotten city, in every tavern or inn that you have ever thought to frequent, in the very tower where you receive your orders. Who do you think its servants serve? Who do they really serve? Ho stammered. I don't know. The vermin prince shook his head. No, you do. You do know. You know exactly who they serve. You know it as well as you know who it is that you serve. You serve her, the witch, and you deserve nothing but her scraps. I had hoped that I could win you over, that you would join me, but I suppose that was my foolishness speaking. Ho was at a crossroads. He could continue on. He could continue with his ruse. But that ruse had already failed him, clearly and spectacularly. And so he adopted a new stratagem, one that had rarely, if ever, served him well. Humble honesty. Please, listen to me, Mouse. That is not my name, and it never was! The vermin prince roared again and began dragging himself toward Ho. No, of course not. I apologize, my prince. Ho panicked, unable as he was to draw on nostalgia, to draw on the time that he had shared with his former student. It's just, we don't have to do this. We don't have to fight. Really, we want the same things. The vermin prince looked disgusted and offended, hurt almost, as he shook his head and responded. You do not want what I want. You do not want what I need, what I deserve, what is rightfully mine. You wanted to escape to the surface, so you ran. You tried to run back to her, to tell her everything, I had shared with you, everything I had shown you, to sully my revelation by letting it fall upon her ancient, evil ears. Vermin Prince clenched his fists repeatedly, allowing them to shake and quiver by his sides. You showed where your allegiances lie. You spurned the generosity of the Vermin Prince. So yes, Master Ho, we have to fight. Ho swallowed hard and forced himself to grin at his former student. Well, I guess you're right. I better drink. He took the jug in both hands and tilted it up to his mouth slowly. He felt the weight of the vessel shift as that caustic liquor rushed down toward his face, assaulting his every sense with its stinging presence. He opened his mouth wide. If he was to compete with Mouse, with the Vermin Prince, with the strange, horrible powers he possessed, perhaps even with the squalid masses he commanded, then he would need to be very drunk. Indeed. That corrosive liquid ate away at his mouth, and it tore at his throat as he forced it down into his stomach. And though he swallowed it as quickly as possible, the sooner to be rid of it, tendrils of its repulsive odor still managed to climb up into his nasal passages, where they monopolized his sense of scent, drowning out nearly everything else. Ho coughed struggling to keep the liquor down, fearing what it would do to his throat if he was forced to swallow it again. And then, forcing a grin, he held the jug out to the vermin prince. He spoke. Finally, you're allowed to take a drink. Are you ready to learn my drunken style, mouse? Anger and hate flashed in the vermin prince's beady eyes. That is not my name, and I am far beyond your drunken style. I am beyond anything you have ever experienced. Ho laughed in response, shuddering as the liquor congealed in his stomach and began to spread its warmth out through his limbs. Are you sure? He tipped the jug to his mouth once again, but this time he kept his lips pursed shut, only miming the act of imbibing that hateful elixir. And as the fumes began to overwhelm him, as they made it difficult to think and coaxed tears out of his eyes, he lowered the jug. He began to sway back and forth erratically, and he spoke again. You look like you could use a drink, mouse. The vermin prince stared daggers at his former master. No. I don't need a crutch. And before the words had even reached Ho's ears, the vermin prince lunged forward with a shocking speed, a speed belied by his ruined leg. And as Ho watched, motionless, helpless, unprepared to fight or even to simply defend himself, the vermin prince shot out a shaking, quivering fist. Ho clenched his eyes shut as he was showered with both the shards of the shattered jug as well as droplets of the vicious liquid it had contained. And when he opened them, when he raised his eyelids, he saw his former student. He saw Mouse. He saw the vermin prince settling into a fighting stance. But it was a stance that Ho had never taught him. It was a stance that Ho had never even seen. Ho watched, more curious than anything else, as the vermin prince kicked his bad leg out to the side, lowered himself down upon his good one, and hunched his shoulders up by his ears, all the while keeping his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his flesh, clenched so tightly that the blood of his palms could only trickle out between his fingers. The vermin prince glanced down, briefly, at his hands, at the drops of blood splattering upon the floor. And when he looked back up, he was crazed, possessed, filled with too many ideas coming too quickly, thoughts too abundant to express in anything but a crazed rambling. You were my teacher. You taught me more than anyone had, more than anyone would. He swayed back and forth as the vermin prince ranted. A half step and a stumble backward, an unpredictable lean. He gave himself over to the rhythmless dance. And the vermin prince, with his eyes given over to a logic he could not properly express, with his aspect maddening and his speech even worse, he continued his tirade. You showed us that everything we knew, everything that existed, that it was all nothing, nothing at all. Everything was nothing. Nothingness was everything. It was nothing but shadows, meaningless reflections of the truth, of what is truly real, of what is really true. Suddenly, with the same terrible quickness he had earlier exhibited, the vermin prince began to lunge forward repeatedly, feigning attacks that were never meant to connect, before hopping back upon his good leg and repeating the cycle once again. Ho saw the tactic for what it was. An effort by the vermin prince to take his opponent's measure, to gauge his quickness, his reflexes, to test whether his dance was as without pattern, as without rhythm, as without meaning as Ho desperately hoped it to be. But even then, even knowing the purpose of the vermin prince's attacks, Ho was still concerned because they all drew incredibly close, drew far, far too close. You didn't tell us the truth, though. The real truth. No, you never told us that. You told us what you told us, and you taught us what you taught us. So little and even less. And then you handed us over to her, to the witch, and you sent us marching off to our deaths, never the wiser, never telling us the real truth. The vermin prince's fusillade of feinted attacks continued, drawing so close that Ho could feel the fetid air they displaced. And worst of all, with every strike of those blood-streaked fists, the vermin prince's attacks drew closer. You didn't tell us the truth. You wouldn't tell us the truth. Maybe you couldn't tell us the truth. You couldn't tell us because you didn't know. Suddenly, the vermin prince spun and hopped into the air, shooting his one good leg back with such force, with such speed, with such confidence that Ho was helpless when confronted by it. He was unable to do anything as he swayed directly into its path, and he felt his sternum nearly crushed by the impact. Ho flew back against the wall. He crumpled down upon the floor, where he lay, his chest heaving, struggling for breath, trying and failing to force his lungs to resume their normal function. And all the while, the vermin prince continued his tirade as he dropped down into a full crouch, using his hands to scuttle around the room. Yes, you acknowledge that the world we know, that it's all shadows, that it's all meaningless. You proclaimed the gods themselves shadows. You cast them out of their mighty, gleaming thrones. As air began to return to Ho's spasming lungs, he studied Ho's movements, watched as he scrambled back and forth across the floor. And as he did, he began to smile. He allowed joy to take seed in his heart, because even though the vermin prince had dealt him a mighty blow, even though his rantings continued, Ho saw something crucially important in his former student's movements. A pattern. But in doing so, in casting the gods into the shadows you knew them to be, in reducing your very existence to nothing, you didn't remain in the shadows, did you, Ho? But you also didn't step into the light. You certainly didn't step into the light, because if you had, then I would have seen you there. No. Thinking yourself wiser, thinking yourself better, you acknowledge the emptiness around you, and in doing so, you set up the emptiness itself as a god, just as you did against Hung. Ho grew ever more alarmed by the vermin prince's words. Of course he knew that he had faced Hung, but how could he have known that went through his head? How could he have known of his apotheosis? He couldn't. He shouldn't. And yet, he did. did. But Ho could not let that trouble him. Not yet, because as he watched, as the vermin prince spoke, as he scuttled across the floor, Ho saw it. He saw not only the pattern that had been, but the pattern that would be. And in a flash, he rolled to his feet and he lunged at his former student, his first and second knuckles extended, as he drove his fist directly at the royal throat of the vermin prince. It wasn't a distracting blow. It wasn't a mercy strike. It was an attack of desperation, a last-ditch effort to take his opponent by surprise. It was the attack of a man who knew he had been bested, who knew he had been defeated, but whose pride would not yet allow him to admit it. And as such, the vermin prince saw it coming. But he didn't dodge. No. He didn't attempt to parry or to block. No. He simply sat there, crouching on the floor, and he took it. He allowed Ho's punch to strike him directly in the throat, a blow that would have collapsed the windpipe of any normal man. But as Ho soon learned, the vermin prince was far, far beyond a normal man. And no sooner had Ho struck, no sooner did he see the vermin prince wince in pain, than that scowl was replaced by a manic smile, by a rictus grin, as the vermin prince shot out his right hand, cuffing his opponent upon the ear, then following through with his strike, smashing Ho's head down upon the filth-covered floor. You didn't tell us that we were trapped. You didn't tell us that the shadows we saw, that they filled a cave we were locked within. You didn't tell us because you didn't even know. Ho's ears rang, and his head filled with blinking lights as he struggled to regain his senses, struggled to make sense of where the vermin prince's voice was coming from, as it seemed to surround him on all sides. You didn't know because you yourself were shackled there. You were chained to the wall by your own creation, by chains of shadows of chains that you yourself had summoned up, trapped there by your grinning nihilism and by your crutch, by your shameful crutch, your reliance upon drink as a way of filling up the emptiness that you yourself had created. Though it pained him, though it was excruciating, Ho shook his head, struggling to return some sense to his addled, exhausted brain. But when he looked up, he saw the vermin prince. But not once. He saw the vermin prince many times, infinite times. He saw a room filled with his former student, who now stood upon his one good leg, stood upon it time and time again as he stretched his arms out wide, opening his hands so that his flowing blood might coat the ground with its crimson gore. But I am bound by no such chains, Master Ho. I am bound by nothing. I am free. Ho watched, speechless, as thick tendrils of pink smoke began to flow out of every one of the vermin prince's infinite nostrils, as the sweet, familiar sense of putrefaction filled the room. I have left the cave. I have stepped out into the light of truth, jaundiced and sickening as it might be. Ho tried to back away, but it was no use. He was surrounded by the vermin prince, by his outstretched arms, the ones that the pink tendrils crept down, spiraling around them, buttressing that terrifying apparition with an abhorrent, eldritch power. I stepped into the light, and I accepted the truth. I was shown the truth, a crippling revelation of who I am and what I deserve. The room filled with laughter. A joyous, triumphant, horrifying laughter. A sound that came not from the vermin prince, who looked up silently, beatifically, before speaking, in a voice just loud enough to be heard over that riotous roar. I am the vermin prince, and I am no longer content with scraps. Suddenly, Ho found himself buffeted by blows, because each of the hundreds, the thousands, the millions of vermin princes, they all attacked, they all struck out, they threw punches and slaps, they bit and they headbutted, they kneed and they stomped with their one good leg, and Ho could do nothing to dodge or defend himself, could do nothing but roll upon the earth, struggling to protect his head in midsection, struggling to remain alive as he was assailed by attacks that not even his 8-arm technique could counter, because those attacks were infinite and never-ending. After a moment of rolling, of blocking attacks as well as he could, Ho noticed that the room had filled with a new laugh. Not the disembodied laughter of before, but a good-natured chuckle that emerged from each of those infinite pairs of chapped, blistered lips. It was the vermin prince, and he was enjoying himself, toying with Ho, relishing the feeling of having surpassed his former master. Struggling to catch his breath, to find enough air to form words and spit them out into that smoke-filled chamber, Ho spoke. What are you trying to do? What do you want? A million faces looked down upon Ho in confusion as the vermin prince stopped, baffled that Ho could still not understand. I want what I deserve. I want to rule Ravana. I want to take what I deserve and to give my people what they deserve, to free them from their wretchedness and for Ravana to thrive. Ho, breathing heavily, taking advantage of the brief respite he had been gifted with, spoke again, eager to bargain his way out of a fight that he had already lost. But isn't that what Caleria wants too? She wishes to save us all from the centaurs. The vermin prince roared, furious, and his body twisted and convulsed in anger as an infinity of legs raised and then stomped downward upon Ho's supine form, casting his former master into the depths of agony as every inch of his being was racked by unimaginable pain. No, how dare you? The centaurs, they only attack because of her excesses and deprivations, because of her and those like her, because of her, those like her, and those that support her, because of you. His body spasming as the pain of a million stomps continued to streak up and down his body. Ho struggled to speak, struggled to beg and to plead. Please, I didn't want to work for her. I didn't want to. Just let me leave. Please, let me leave and I'll disappear. Ho's mind fought to comprehend what his eyes told him was occurring in the room, fought to make sense of the millions of vermin princes that somehow filled that tiny cell, to understand how they all independently came together, how they combined into one figure coursing with vitality and hate and resentment, a figure that looked down upon Ho with nothing but joy in his small, beady eyes. You can leave with the rest of us. You can leave these tunnels once the filth and refuse of Ravenna, once it's discarded, once they who the city has gotten rid of and cast away, once we back up in those insufficient sewers, and then finally bubble up to the surface, once we take what I deserve, once we seize Ravenna. The vermin prince held his right hand up in front of his face, exhaling softly. And as he did, his hand was surrounded by that same pink smoke, a smoke that congealed and hardened around his hand, healing the gashes in his palms, hardening the skin, thickening the bones. I used to think so highly of you, so highly that it now shames me that I ever held one so cowardly, so weak, so ignorant in such high regard. Ho, now no longer surrounded, began to move toward the door. Unable to stand, barely able to crawl, he slid backwards from the vermin prince, anything to get away from that terrible, awful creature, the one whose visage darkened as he continued to speak. You could have joined with me. You, like all of my followers. You would have been rewarded. Suddenly, Ho heard the door slam shut behind him as the vermin prince staggered forward, dragging his ruined leg behind him and holding his dreadful pink fist out in front of him. But instead, you ran. You betrayed me once again, betrayed me for the final time, and instead of being rewarded, you shall be punished. I should kill you. I should kill you dead. It would only be just. But no, that would be too easy. It wouldn't be punishment enough. Your punishment is living to see the climax of my powers, to see what it is that I summon into this world, to watch as I bend it to my command. Your punishment is to live to lay eyes upon my destroyer. Thanks for checking out this, the best episode of SKALD yet. There are a lot of podcasts out there, and there are a lot of fictional narrative-based podcasts out there too. But here's the thing. There's nothing else like SKALD. Nothing. And because of that, it can be hard for the show to find an audience. That's why it's so important that you leave a review of the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or all three. Plus, if you leave a good one, I'll read it right here on the show. This one comes from Widowmaker88. Beautifully brutal. SKALD got its hooks in me with the very first episode. I can easily imagine riding into battle with Maul while Manowar is blaring in the background. Anyone into brutal storytelling should give it a listen. You won't regret it. There are two things that SKALD needs to continue growing. The first is positive word of mouth, which we cover with iTunes reviews. But the second is actual money. Money to cover the raw costs of the show, and more significantly, the time it takes to birth this thing into the world each and every week. And for that, we have Patreon. With Patreon, you can pledge a couple bucks a month to the things you enjoy. Things like SKALD. You can do what should come pretty naturally. Supporting the content that you love. And if you give a little more, you can get awesome rewards, like my man Brad Nelms did. Brad contributes to SKALD at the $10 level, which gets him, among other things, this shout out. Seeing as you're a SKALD fan, I think you'll be pretty interested in what Brad's getting up to with his podcast, The Writer's Beard. Find it on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spreaker. And listen to Brad read classic weird fiction by H.P. Lovecraft. If you've never read Lovecraft before, this is a great way to get into it, as reading the prose yourself can be, as much as I love it, a little bit of a slog. Let Brad do the hard work for you as you delve into what is some pretty foundational stuff from my work on SKALD. Just search for The Writer's Beard on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spreaker, and give Brad a follow on Twitter at The Writer's Beard. Go tell him thanks for helping to make SKALD possible. And if you want to start chipping in to help us reach our goal of adding weird synth intros and outros to SKALD, head to patreon.com/SKALD today. If only 50 more listeners each gave $1 a month, we could have synth noises next month. Patreon.com/SKALD. If you're looking for more information on me or any of my many projects, including SKALD, my wrestling talk show, Straight Shoot, my comics work on the upcoming G.I. Joe series for IDW, or anything else, head to AubreySitterson.com and make sure to follow me on all social media, especially Tumblr, as I'm trying to be more active there. I'm Aubrey Sitterson, no spaces, no underscores, no numbers, just Aubrey Sitterson on everything. Finally, it's time for my weekly recommendation. Recently, I was fortunate enough to go to Riot Fest Denver, where I saw the original Misfits, Jerry Only, Doyle, Wolfgang von Frankenstein, and Danzig absolutely kill it in their first show together in more than 30 years. I lucked out because my pals in the Ascension, Victor and Connor, were kind enough to let me tag along backstage where I actually got to meet the band. My mind is still blown, and I've been singing Misfits tracks all week long. If you've never gotten into the Misfits, you should do so right now, so you're ready in case they launch a full-on reunion tour, which I am really hoping for. Start with Collection 1 and Collection 2. I know there's a stigma attached with greatest hits albums, but fight through it anyways. Those two albums will teach you everything you need to know about the horror punk pioneers. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.